Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Trump links the ongoing dispute over Greenland to the Nobel Peace Prize as the British Prime Minister labels his tariff threats as completely wrong. At least 39 people have been killed in Spain's worst rail disaster in over a decade. And Prince Harry and a group of high-profile celebrities attend a High Court hearing in a landmark privacy case against the publishers of the Daily Mail. President Trump has repeated his demand to take control of Greenland and linked the dispute to him being snubbed for the Nobel Peace Prize. In a letter to Norway's Prime Minister, he also said he no longer feels obligated to think purely of peace because he had not been awarded the coveted prize. Earlier today, the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, described his threats of tariffs over the issue as completely wrong. Take a listen.
Alliances endure because they're built on respect and partnership, not pressure. That is why I said the use of tariffs against allies is completely wrong. It is not the right way to resolve differences within an alliance. Nor is it helpful to frame efforts to strengthen Greenland's security as a justification for economic pressure. Any decision about the future status of Greenland belongs to the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark alone. That right is fundamental, and we support it. A trade war is in no one's interest, and my job is always to act in the UK's national interest.
For more on this, I'm joined by economist Laurie Laird, who is in London. Laurie, it's great to have you on the show as always, but I just I just want to start with some lines that we've been getting out just before I came on air to you, and it's actually the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He's in Davos, he is speaking, and it's really interesting what he's been saying because it says European retaliation would be very unwise, and Donald Trump has also just said on NBC in the last few minutes, he is vowing to impose tariffs on Europe. So there seems to be no let-up from the US on this issue.
Absolutely. And in fact, the rhetoric seems even a little bit more menacing. I was taken aback by those Bessent comments, and I'm so glad that you brought them up. Add to that Donald Trump told a U.S. network that Europe should be paying much more attention to Ukraine. Now, that's a buzzword. That is really going to worry Europeans, perhaps more than the threat of tariffs, because they are concerned that the U.S., which has kind of withdrawn its assistance in helping Ukraine, will withdraw further, will perhaps not provide defense equipment, will not provide intelligence. So for Donald Trump to tell the Europeans, mind your own backyard, I think will frighten Europeans immensely. And for Bessent to say, don't retaliate, sort of, or else, you feel like you want to hear cartoonist music after that, don't you? Duh, 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 duh. It sounds so menacing. And after those comments came out, we saw the European markets, which have been doing reasonably well given all of this, took a little bit of a dive over the final hour of the day, simply because it looks like the rhetoric's going in the wrong way.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Laurie, because there has been a bit more of a sell-off when we look across European markets, as you do say, as the rhetoric does ramp up. I also thought it was interesting that Scott Bessent said everyone should take the president at his words. But let's focus a little bit more on stocks, because if you invest in gold and silver, this is a pretty good day for you. So we really see precious metals surging at the moment. Do you think that this is pretty normal in this kind of circumstance?
Absolutely. I mean, the knee-jerk reaction is to go for the safe haven. The feeling is that gold, it's something you can touch, you can hold it in your hand. That will always be something that will not lose its value. Add to that the less reliable that the U.S. is as a military ally, as a financial ally, the less that central banks, who are big holders of gold in their portfolio of reserves, the less they want to be associated with the U.S. dollar, because U.S. policy seems so erratic at the moment. So we have seen some of the smaller central banks over the past year or so sort of slowly diversifying away from dollar assets, not just dollar cash, but U.S. Treasury bills and bonds, some of them even cold equities. And they're looking toward gold, which feels a little bit safer. And as this rhetoric continues, and let's be honest, I think it's unlikely we're going to see a resolution anytime soon. Donald Trump has been going on about Greenland for years and really seems to have the bit in his teeth about it at the moment. I think that despite the fact there are some analysts saying maybe gold looks a little toppish after that rally last year, given these economic and geopolitical uncertainties, these hard metals, gold and silver in particular, are going to look like pretty safe bets.
Yeah, like you said, the safe havens are becoming increasingly popular in an uncertain world when Donald Trump has entered a year or so ago, believe it or not. But Laurie, Europe is threatening...
Exhausting year.
Yeah, just a year. I know, we've been really busy, haven't we? But what I find interesting is Europe, actually, some European countries have had a pretty strong rhetoric, and they are threatening to strike back against President Donald Trump over these tariff threats. You know, I've been hearing places about 93 billion euros in retaliatory levies. Do you know, is the EU threatening to start a trade war at the moment? Because it's quite interesting, because there's trade agreements happening that haven't been signed yet.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is a great point. This is this 93 billion that you mentioned is a list of tariffs that the EU had prepared prior to the summer, where they signed is too strong a word. They thought that they had agreed a trade agreement with the U.S. Ursula von der Leyen flew over to Scotland and met him at his golf resort. She thought she had a deal set. So the first step that the EU is discussing is these retaliatory tariffs, and that would hit things like bourbon, Boeing aircraft, but it's purely a sort of tit for tat thing. Now, this is where it gets sort of interesting. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has said, forget about that. Let's act more strongly. Let's finally unleash what's called the anti-coercion instrument that the EU passed in 2023. And this isn't sort of just a trade tariff thing. This gives the EU incredibly broad measures to penalize adversaries. And it would allow the EU to do things like ban US banks from the European system, ban them from using the SWIFT system, which is a communication system that really underpins all international transactions. It would allow the EU to go after some of those high-tech companies that are operating in Europe and sort of underpaying their taxes, in the opinions of many. It gives the EU very wide latitude. It could put bans on the export of pharmaceuticals, so thereby getting in between Americans and their Ozempic. Now, Emmanuel Macron would like to use this incredibly strong measure. But just before we came on air, we had Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, actually saying, I'm trying to tone Macron down. And this is the problem, Leigh-Ann, is getting these EU countries to agree on measures, particularly when some of the biggest economies here, like Italy, were not targeted in these tariffs that were announced on Saturday. Italy, Poland, also a big and rising and becoming a more important country in the EU, not targeted by these tariffs. So getting agreement becomes all that much more difficult when not all EU countries are being targeted with these new tariffs.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a great point to make, because that's something that does obviously lead a lot of people joining the table to make that tariff bazooka work, as they've been calling it. But Laurie,
absolutely,
the fate of a majority of President Donald Trump's tariffs right now is actually in the hands of the US Supreme Court. What would a ruling against Trump mean right now for everything that's going on?
I mean, this is another wild card, and this is the story. It's so difficult to get your arms around it, isn't it? But a lower court has ruled that Trump's authority to impose tariffs under emergency powers is illegal. So the government, the administration has appealed that to the Supreme Court. We're expecting a ruling imminently. I'm seeing some reports it could come as soon as tomorrow, but it doesn't. I've looked at the Supreme Court schedule. It doesn't look like there's a chance for them to issue a ruling. They're hearing some oral arguments, but it's imminent. Now, the lawyers seem to feel that the Supreme Court will rule against the government. That means initially, all of these tariffs, or most of these tariffs, will be deemed illegal. So that raises questions over whether Trump can use the same authority to add more tariffs onto Europe. So that may be, one of the reasons that Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, wants to restrain President Macron of France. Let's wait and see what this ruling is. But there's also a chance we may not get the ruling until the 26th or the 29th of January, which comes up very close against this 1st of February date. Now, I'm getting a little too detailed here, and I apologize for that. There is no question in my mind that if these tariffs are, or this authority that Trump used is not an appropriate or legal way to impose these tariffs, that there are a number of other tools that Trump may be able to find to impose these tariffs. It'll be a little more complicated. They may not be able to be open-ended the way this existing set of tariffs are, but this administration will find a way. It may take a little bit longer.
So the tariff saga continues. Economist Laurie Laird, thank you so much for joining me. For more on this, I'm joined from Glasgow by former member of the European Parliament, Struan Stevenson. Struan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. So in the last half an hour or so, Donald Trump has been speaking on NBC, and he says Europe should focus on the war in Ukraine, not Greenland, and insisted he will follow through with his tariff plan. Does the US president have a point? Should Europe be focusing on Ukraine?
Well, Europe is focusing on Ukraine very much, but we're also focusing on the international cooperation, which for generations has included Europe with America, and indeed the UK and America, with our special relationship that we've always enjoyed. And what Donald Trump is doing now is he's trying to replace the rule of law with the law of the jungle, and that's simply going to destroy transatlantic relations, perhaps for a generation. So, this is a fantasy that he really has to abandon. I was listening with interest to your previous speaker, who was talking, of course, about the trade bazooka. Mm-hmm. The trade bazooka, she was saying, because Trump has said he doesn't want to apply tariffs to countries like Italy, where he's very friendly with Giorgia Meloni, and Poland, where he's also very friendly with the president, that could hold up the imposition of the trade bazooka in the usual EU paralysis. Mm-hmm. In fact, that is not correct. The EU were well aware of that when they introduced the anti-coercion system back in 2023, and they wrote into the law that qualified majority is all that is required to pass this law. It cannot be blocked by any individual or any couple of member states. So it could be implemented very rapidly indeed. It never has been used. It was designed actually targeting China to stop the bullying of the Chinese, and it has never been implemented. So it would be an unprecedented way for the EU to react. But believe me, it could be introduced very rapidly. It would mean punitive tariffs across the board on things like American automobiles, aircraft, finance, the digital economy. But then it would also sever relations on sharing intelligence, defense, security. It would be disastrous. And Trump must realize this. I think in the past, the UK and the EU have proved to be too weak, always believing that a nice smile and a bit of gentle diplomacy would be all that was required to keep Trump on side. Trump recognizes weakness whenever he sees it. That's what he wrote about in his book about doing deals. And when he sees weakness, he exploits it. And now I think the EU at last has woken up. And I think they are now prepared to, fight back. And Trump does also recognize people coming from a position of strength are not quite so easy to push over. So I'm glad that at last the EU appear to have woken up and smelt the coffee.
So,
as far as the
Gerrans, sorry, I just wanted to butt in there because I found it really interesting that you said it seems like Europe has woken up and it smelt the coffee, which is really interesting because, Donald Trump has criticised Europe. J.D. Vance has criticised Europe. Donald Trump says Europe just has meetings about meetings and nothing actually gets done. But America is Britain's strongest ally, and both countries have always boasted about their special relationship. We actually heard from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. How difficult of a position is he in right now, as he has to please both the US and NATO countries and keep Europe on side? And to me, I thought Keir Starmer didn't go as far as the French President Emmanuel Macron did.
When Keir Starmer went to his meeting in the Oval Office with a letter from King Charles explaining that it was an unprecedented privilege for the British monarch to invite for a second time any head of state, this has gone down, I think, in Trump's mind as a position of weakness being displayed by the British Prime Minister. And again, I think in his statement today in relation to the crisis over Greenland, of course, Keir Starmer is explaining the history of the special relationship and how important it is for Britain and the Americans to continue to cooperate in this international way, and how the Greenland crisis could undermine that. On the other hand, I think it's important for the Americans to remember that London is still a major hub for international financial transactions that involve the dollar, involving oil, involving international finance. If we cut off the access of the Americans to the London market, the same as your previous speaker was talking about cutting off through the trade bazooka access to the EU and even to Switzerland, this would have a major impact on Trump. These initiatives would also carefully target the places that would hurt Trump's MAGA votes and would undermine his success in the forthcoming elections.
Sorry, I just wanted to butt in there because I wanted to talk to you about this letter to the Norwegian Prime Minister that Donald Trump appears to have linked the Greenland dispute to not getting the Nobel Peace Prize. And I find this absolutely fascinating. And I don't know what your thoughts on it are, because we've spoken about this trade bazooka that Europe could put in place. We've talked about retaliatory methods that could be used. But do you think Donald Trump is just that annoyed that he didn't get his prize?
Well, he's now been given the medal that was won quite fairly and squarely by Maria Corona Machado in Colombia. And I was astonished that he actually accepted that prize and intends to keep it. It's almost as if he believes he should have got the prize after arresting Maduro. So I mean, he's a mercurial character. You never know what's going through his mind next. So, you know, for him to appear to be saying that the failure for the Norwegians to give him the Nobel Peace Prize is why he's targeting Greenland. I mean, if he's seriously considering one of the options, which we've heard again and again is on the table in the Oval Office, of a military intervention in Greenland. It may be the biggest island in the world, but it has a population of only 56,000 people, mostly Inuits. He could have a military intervention that would include one man and a dog would be enough to take over Greenland. These kind of threats in this day and age, you know, after the UN Charter, after the post-Second World War agreement on international affairs, this would completely undermine the entire way that the international community, you know, behaves. And I can't see the difference between Trump saying America must annex Greenland to provide America with its security. What's the difference between that and Putin saying Russia must take over Ukraine to protect Russia's security? Or President Xi saying China must take over Taiwan to protect China's security? What is the difference? Trump, by doing this, is potentially throwing open the door, putting down the drawbridge to any autocrat in the world to follow their, you know, pursuit of expansionism, of empire building, like Putin appears to be doing.
But it's really interesting because actually on NBC, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said taking ownership of Greenland is crucial in the geopolitical chess match with Russia and China. But Struan Stevenson, we'll leave it there. Really good to get your thoughts on that. As you said, Donald Trump changing the rule of law with the law of the jungle. Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Now, at least 39 people have been killed in a high-speed train crash in Spain. The collision happened as a train travelling from Malaga to Madrid collided with another that was going from the capital to Huelva. It's believed those that were killed and injured were in the front carriages of the second train. We can now speak to our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thank you so much for joining us. So we've heard from the Spanish Prime Minister. He spoke this afternoon. What did he have to say?
Yeah, good afternoon, Leigh-Ann. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, made a visit this Monday to the sites of the crash, and he said that Sunday night, when the accident took place, had been a night of profound pain. He said that a full investigation was now underway to get to the causes of the accident, and he said that would be an investigation that would be conducted with absolute transparency, and he also announced 3 days of national mourning. The Spanish royal family has also put out a statement saying that they are extremely concerned by what has happened, and they are following the situation closely.
And actually, let's talk a little bit about what happened during that accident, because we do know that 2 trains were involved in the crash yesterday. Any more details about what led up to the event?
Yeah, what happened to start with, Leigh-Ann, was that there was news alerts that one train had derailed. It became quickly apparent that there were 2 services involved in the accident. A Malaga to Madrid, so northbound train, derailed on a straight piece of track, a new piece of track, something that has really baffled railway experts. And the Spanish Transport Minister, José Puente, said it was extremely strange that derailed derailment had occurred. But when that train derailed on that piece of track, parts of the carriages were then flung onto the opposite side of the track. 20 seconds after the derailment, a southbound train slammed into that original derailed service, and most of the fatalities were in the front two carriages of the second train. We've heard from some of the people who were involved in the crash, more than 400 people in total on those two services, Leigh-Ann, and survivors saying that there was sudden braking and then suitcases started to fly around and then people were thrown out of their seats. Firefighters saying that it was an extremely difficult job to try to deal with the twisted wreckage and reach people who'd survived the impact, having to move fatalities, dead bodies out of the way to be able to free some of those survivors.
Ross Cullen, thank you so much for joining us. Now to China, where the government has released new economic and demographic data for the year 2025, lauded as a success by the Chinese Communist Party. The latest data shows the government hit its target of 5% GDP growth, but it also shows that China's population has once again declined, adding to Beijing's ongoing demographic problems. Our correspondent Jan David has the story.
Once known for its blooming population, China now faces a new demographics problem. Since 2022, the country's birth rate has dropped consistently. Today, the central government announced another year of population decline.
The number of births for the whole year was 7.92 million, with a birth rate of 5.63 per thousand. The number of deaths was 11.31 million, with a death rate of 8.04 per thousand. The natural population growth rate was minus 2.41 per thousand.
For Beijing, it's a crisis waiting to happen. Analysts warn demographics issues will impact its economy. By 2040, the European Central Bank says low fertility could cut GDP growth by 0.3%. In response, Beijing has rolled out new policies, cutting the cost of childbirth and making marriage registration easier. A win for wedding dress shop owners like Chen Juan.
In 2025, the government introduced a policy allowing couples to register their marriage in a different location from their hometowns. This makes getting married more convenient for young people.
For others, government help has not gone far enough. New data shows China's birth rates dropped to a record low in 2025. The biggest problem for many, the price tag. Despite increasing government support, China is the second most expensive place to raise a child in the world.
If you don't have sufficient financial conditions to get married, then even if you force two people to be together, life will not be good. From my child's own perspective, he feels he doesn't currently have the financial ability to support a girlfriend, let alone children.
Boosted by its exports, China today also announced it had hit its 5% GDP growth target. But experts warn for growth to continue. China's population must start to grow as well. Jan David, Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The Kremlin says Vladimir Putin has received an invitation from the US to join a new peace council for Gaza. The White House initiative, chaired by President Trump, aims to oversee Gaza's transitional administration and enforce a ceasefire. Russia is reportedly reviewing the proposal and seeking further details before deciding on participation. Syria has declared a nationwide ceasefire with the Kurdish-led SDF, ending nearly 2 weeks of fighting. The deal will integrate SDF forces into the army and return control of key northeastern regions to Damascus. Kurdish leaders say the agreement protects some of their local autonomy, while Syria pledges to recognize Kurdish cultural rights. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the kingdom welcomes the ceasefire agreement. And at least 18 people have been killed and around 50,000 forced to flee as wildfires sweep through parts of Chile. The worst hit areas are in Ñuble and Biobío regions, where dozens of fires are burning. Fueled by strong winds and extreme heat, President Gabriel Boric says all resources are being used, but local officials say help was slow to arrive as homes and communities were destroyed. Prince Harry and other high-profile names, including Sir Elton John and Elizabeth Hurley, are suing the publishers of the Daily Mail in a landmark trial set to last 9 weeks. They claim they're victims of abhorrent criminal activity due to alleged unlawful information gathering between 1993 and 2011. For more on this, I'm joined from London by journalist and also a royal commentator, Afia Hagen. Afia, brilliant to see you on, and thank you so much for joining me as always. So, this is Prince Harry's third major court battle accusing newspaper groups of unlawful behaviour. So why is he in court again?
Well, Prince Harry is in court this time with the Associated Newspaper Group and the Daily Mail because of the tactics that he and other plaintiffs have said have been used to gather information about them for stories. So this is things like phone hacking, bugging people's phones, secret recording devices, and the use of private detectives and other covert, unlawful ways to gather information in which to write stories about them. So Prince Harry has made this his life's mission to be able to hold the tabloid newspapers particularly to account of the way that they gather information to publish stories. Now, this affected his mother, Princess Diana, back in the 90s, and it was proven that, yes, her phones were tapped. And in fact, she wasn't being paranoid about how papers had stories on her and how those stories ended up in the papers. Prince Harry himself has long complained about stories in the papers about him. He knows that some of them were gathered unlawfully by MGN newspapers and the News of the World. So now it's about him taking the Daily Mail, the Associated Newspaper Group to task and holding them accountable for what he and other plaintiffs say is the way they gathered information about them.
So, Afia, what makes this case so significant as we are seeing pictures right now of Prince Harry arriving at the court in London, along with other celebrities, Elizabeth Hurley too?
What makes this so significant is that this challenges one of the UK's biggest newspaper groups. It challenges the establishment about the way they gather information, and it's also about press ethics. This phone hacking scandal was something that came about in the early 2000s and 90s. We had the Leveson inquiry into phone hacking, which showed that it had been done, but yet it continued after that. And so this is about accountability for Prince Harry, holding those newspaper groups accountable and saying, look, you cannot just any way you want gather information about people in the public eye for your stories. It's about holding a really, really huge newspaper group to account and really questioning their ethics.
And Prince Harry is actually due to give evidence on Thursday, and the trial is expected to last 9 weeks. But what are critics saying? It is the whole privilege versus principle debate right now.
Well, yes, exactly. You're right in saying that Prince Harry is due to give evidence in court on Thursday. And lots of people saying that, you know, he's someone in the public eye. He should perhaps expect this to happen. But this is about the principle of the thing. It's not about the privilege. And yes, he does have money to be able to take the newspaper group to court, as do the other plaintiffs that include Sir Elton John and Liz Hurley. But yes, he has deep pockets to be able to do that, but it's not about how famous he is or the power that he has. It's about the principle, and him being able to do that, to hold newspaper groups accountable, can make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody else.
And the publisher of the Daily Mail, Afia, has strongly denied all allegations. And as we know, they are also historical claims that are happening. These happened many years ago. So what's been their response?
Yes, associated newspapers have firmly rejected all claims of wrongdoing. They argue that the allegations are historic, like you said, they're unsupported by evidence and that they are legally flawed and that they will defend themselves. They also said they have great journalists working for the paper and this is demeaning to them as well. But however, critics of this say that this has been said by journalists in the past and they have been proven wrong through cases in the past, through the phone hacking era. And so it's not too late and it's never too late to hold the press accountable. That's the argument of Prince Harry and the other plaintiffs in this case.
And Afia, I did notice that Harry is, of course, in London, but he will not be seeing his father, King Charles, and Prince William doesn't appear to be anywhere either. What ramification does this have for him and his family? Because Prince Harry has expressed that he would like to extend an olive branch and begin to build bridges with his very own family.
Yeah, you're right in saying Prince Harry is in London. He'll be in London for the duration of the week. At the moment, the King and Queen are in Scotland, as are the Prince and Princess of Wales. So we cannot expect any kind of meeting between any of them this week. I mean, we could be surprised towards the end of the week, but we don't think that it's on the cards. In terms of the ramifications for the family, that they know how intent Prince Harry is on holding newspapers accountable, how he's made this his personal life's work. They are preferring to stay above the fray. They don't want anything to do with this, even though especially the Prince of Wales knows that phone hacking has been going on, has been a victim of it himself, but they are keeping calm and carrying on as it were. They don't necessarily approve of Prince Harry sticking his head above the parapet in this way, sticking up for himself, his wife, his children, and other people who might have been the victim of phone hacking, and particularly his mother, Princess Diana, who was a victim of phone hacking back in the 90s. They are preferring to stay well away from this court case and its ramifications.
Afia, as the royal family always say, never complain and never explain. Afia Hagen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. China's economy was up by 5% last year, boosted by the manufacturing sector, despite slow growth in the last months of 2025. The world's second-largest trade player struggled with a property crisis and turmoil caused by US President Donald Trump's tariff policies. This week, it reported a record trade surplus of nearly $1.2 trillion, driven by booming exports to non-US markets. Turning to all the sports news now, and the Africa Cup of Nations have condemned the behaviour of some players and match officials during Sunday's chaotic final, where Senegal defeated Morocco. At one point, late on in the match, fans tried to storm the pitch as Senegal players walked off in protest at the host being awarded a penalty in Prince Moulay Stadium. The West African team also received heavy criticism by the FIFA boss Gianni Infantino, who described the events as intolerable. And the British tennis player Francesca Jones was left sobbing after her run in the Australian Open came to an end following a groin injury. Jones, who was playing against Polish qualifier Lidia Kamilunikovic, was aiming to reach the second round of the Grand Slam. Meanwhile, on the winning end of the court, Novak Djokovic marked a victorious return at the event by defeating Pedro Martinez at Melbourne Park, marking his 100th win at the tournament. A reminder of our top stories. Trump links the ongoing dispute over Greenland to the Nobel Peace Prize, and the British Prime Minister labels his tariff threats as completely wrong. At least 39 people have been killed in Spain's worst rail disaster in over a decade. Prince Harry and a group of high-profile celebrities attend a High Court hearing in a landmark privacy case against the publishers of the Daily Mail. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. The rail deal with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with a W News Extra. Goodbye, and thank you for joining us.